I'm Ross Kemp. I've always had an affinity with the ocean, and in particular, shipwrecks.
This is a proper shipwreck.
Many of my ancestors served at sea.
This is very much like the one that my grandfather drove during the Second World War.
Some were shipwrecked, and some sadly lost their lives.
They're ready to go to war, and out of nowhere, this tremendous explosion.
Now I'm a qualified commercial diver, and in this series, I will be travelling further and diving deeper than ever before.
It's critical on this dive that we're all on our game.
Helped by my trusted dive team,
How good was that?
It was one of the best dives I've ever had.
I'm going to plunge into lost worlds
Oh, wow.
to find clues
It is a treasure trove of Second World War history.
and recover treasure.
It's silver!
So this could be a piece of the Mary Rose.
I'll reveal how these ships went down
Why's she under the sea?
Well, that's for you boys to discover, isn't it?
and unlock some of our greatest maritime mysteries.
Is this potentially a new wreck?
That's what I think.
The pressure is intense and the stakes are high.
Mallory, where are you? Ross, you need to come up. Can anyone hear me?
As I become a deep-sea treasure hunter. In this episode, I'm heading to Normandy on the underwater trail of the greatest amphibious landing in history, D-Day.
Wow, the Sherman tank.
Diving in some of the most challenging waters I've ever experienced.
That's the first time I've ever felt it. I felt slightly hemmed in. I felt claustrophobic.
Ian, can you hear me?
That take me to the limits of my capabilities.
I'm not getting you, bro. Where's Ross now? Where's Ross?
The White Cliffs of the South Coast are one of the most iconic sights in Britain. Their chalk faces a symbol of home, and in war, of defiance. No more so than when the Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied France started on the 6th of June 1944. D-Day.
5,000 ships landed 150,000 troops and their equipment on the Normandy beaches. It was the biggest seaborne invasion in history and brought about the beginning of the end of World War II. But the top secret preparations for D-Day took place here in Studland Bay.
In this quiet corner of Dorset, under conditions of the utmost secrecy, the Allies performed a live-firing rehearsal of the D-Day landings to prepare themselves for what was to come. Maritime archaeologist Dave Parnham has brought me to Fort Henry where, in April 1944, the Allied commanders watched Operation Smash, as it was codenamed, take place.
Dave, just tell me a little bit about Operation Smash.
Operation Smash was the largest live-firing exercise in preparation for the Normandy landings. So it was a complete exercise designed to mimic the landings themselves, to give the troops an experience of what was going to occur, and to allow the tanks, who hadn't seen action before, to work with the experienced infantry who'd come from North Africa and Italy.
So the infantry had already seen some war, but the very young guys that are in the tanks hadn't seen.
No, they'd been in the UK. Most of them would still have been at school when the war started.
Wow.
They were 18 to 20.
So how many tanks were involved?
There were 32 tanks involved here, which was the strength that was launched on D-Day, so it was a full preparation.
And how many troops?
About 6,000, it was 2 brigades.
So hang on, 32 tanks and 6,000 troops?
Yeah, that was the plan for D-Day. The assaulting formation would consist of 2 brigades supported by 32 tanks.
Per beach, because there's more than one beach.
Per beach,
Right.
yeah.
Who witnessed it? Who was here? Who was standing in here?
There was Eisenhower, Churchill, the King and Montgomery, viewing it from this fortification, which was what this was built for.
Eisenhower being the Supreme
The
Commander.
Supreme Commander, Europe. Because these landings are so important that they want to come and witness them to see that they succeed so that they understand what is going on.
D-Day wasn't just a test of manpower versus firepower. It was as much a battle of wits as it was of brute force. An epic struggle between the ingenuity of the Allies and the ingenuity of the Germans. I'm on the hunt for one of the cleverest British inventions of the war, first used in Operation Smash.
Morning, guys.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, mate.
So once again, I'm joined by dive supervisor Neil Brock and my dive buddy Mark Culwick, a former tank commander.
Morning, guys. So, quick dive brief.
Local skipper Pete Williams knows everything there is to know about these tricky waters.
We're going to try and dive with the very last of the flood tide, all right? The tide will become slack during your dive, but if we can catch the last of the flood, it helps clear the silt. It's really silty in Poole Bay. Any questions?
No.
All happy?
Yeah.
Cool with that?
Very happy.
Real?
Makes sense.
All right, I think all we got to do is get my coffee and my bun and we're out of here. We're good?
Coffee and a bun.
Happy days.
The dive site is 3 miles out to sea. And I'm trying to imagine what it must have been like 80 years ago.
These are all preparation for the biggest landing of troops and machinery that there's ever been.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to understand this was massive. Combined British and American Armed Forces, the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy, the Army, the Marines, every man and his dog, all working together.
You can't imagine it now, but on the day, you would have seen ships as far as you could see. There'd have been aircraft flying over, massive battleships.
It would have been incredibly impressive.
Anyway, enough chat. We got to get in the water, guys. We got to take.
Weather reports from those D-Day rehearsals in April 1944 show it was a chilly 8 Celsius with a force 4 wind about 13 miles an hour. The sea would have been choppy with waves up to 1 meter high.
How's that feel, Ross?
Very different conditions from what we're dealing with today.
That's 2 more ready, Pete. Hands on the rail.
Go!
Ross at bottom over, Ross at bottom.
Roger that, understood. Make bottom.
Just come a little lower, mate. Just a little lower.
Out of the gloom, I catch sight of what I've come to see.
Wow.
This is a Valentine tank. A mass-produced British light infantry tank that was used throughout much of the Second World War.
The gun here is a 6-pounder and can fire a shell 3 miles. It had 3 men inside, a commander, a loader, and a driver. And I can't help thinking something must have gone dreadfully wrong for it to end up here on the seabed. These are the runners for the tanks. You can actually see the wheels.
The tank stands upright on the bottom on its own, nearly completely intact.
It was an infantry support tank and not a main battle tank. This tank's now been here for 78 years.
Wow.
It's odd there's no shipwreck nearby. So what is it doing lying on the seabed 3 miles from land?
What is it, mate?
Mark points out some features which suggest that this is no ordinary Valentine tank.
So as you can see here, The gun is actually pointing over the back of the tank, Ross. You can actually move backwards and go above the part where the duplex drive was connected to. The duplex drive is actually what drove the propeller that allowed the Valentine tank to actually move itself through the water.
British Ingenuity had designed a tank that could swim in water as well as drive on land.
These amazing pieces of World War technology which are absolutely cutting edge at the time.
The big question is what happened to this tank during Operation Smash? And more importantly, what happened to the crew that were inside it?
It's been a brief but eye-opening dive.
Mark, topside safety stop, 3 minutes.
Roger, understood.
A tank that can float seems like a completely bizarre concept. And not just to me. My dive buddy Mark served in the 1st Royal Tank Regiment for 11 years, so knows all about the challenges of driving one of these metal beasts.
Quite sort of sobering. You know, you think, look how far away it is from the beach.
Yeah.
You know, imagine going into the water off the back of, you know, a transporter and hoping that you're going to float.
Yeah.
Not knowing for sure. You've got to be, I mean, you're a brave man anyway to be in a tank or to be, you know, embarking on the Allied invasion of occupied France. But doing it in a tank that you hope's going to float takes some balls, to be honest.
Yeah, it does. It takes an awful lot of guts at the end of the day. I mean, we got lovely flat calm water today, a little tiny bit of swell, and then vehicles were in big trouble.
So Mark, on Operation Smash,
Yeah.
how many tanks were lost?
Well, there was 32 tanks made the endeavour to get to the shore, but unfortunately 7 actually didn't make it on that day. 6 crewmen went down with them, and a majority of them would have been the drivers.
Operation Smash was only a practice run, but the bravery of these men was astounding. I simply can't get my head around the idea how a 16-ton Valentine tank could float like a boat. However, there's one left in existence that's not underwater, so I'm off to find out exactly how it worked.
You never get out of this!
I've been diving on the wreck of a floating Valentine tank that sank in Studland Bay during a rehearsal for the D-Day landings in April 1944.
These are the runners for the tanks. You can actually see the wheels.
I want to discover what went wrong with this amphibious tank and what happened to its crew. But before I do that, I need to find out how this ingenious piece of British technology actually worked.
Hello, Bruce.
Ross, how you doing, mate? Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Yvonne.
Ross, can I introduce you to John?
Nice to meet you, John.
John is the owner of this absolutely magnificent beast.
When John Pearson rescued this Valentine tank from an auction in 1984, it had been turned into a bulldozer. He spent 20 years restoring it in minute detail, and I'm meeting him with one of the leading authorities of World War II tanks, Bruce Crompton.
Incredible piece of machinery. How does something that weighs approximately 20 tons float?
Well, this is the secret part. The canvas screen is inflated with compressed air and it rises up about 7 feet. The tank floats because of displacement. It actually floats with the tank hanging under the water surface. The water level's about level with the top of the turret when it's afloat.
So, for instance, if I had a metal spoon and I dropped it in a bucket of water, it would drop to the bottom. Yeah. But if I hammered that spoon out into a boat-like shape, it would displace enough water to actually keep that piece of steel afloat, right?
Got it in one, yeah.
Exactly the same principle.
Can you show me how this girl works?
Yes, certainly. I'll start the compressor and then we'll blow it up.
Stop.
Does that help?
John's Valentine is nearly 80 years old, so the canvas screen needs help to unfold. But when they were first used, these screens were more robust.
Can we have a look at the back and just see how it would have worked? So here it is. Still got the bronze propeller. I'll have that off. I know a Welshman that would have that off. So before you go in the water, you drop this down.
Yep. It steers just like an outdrive or an outboard motor.
Yeah. So the tank comes off the back of a ship out at sea with the screen already inflated. The tank goes beneath the water line, but because the skirt displaces so much water, it floats.
It doesn't walk on the bottom, it floats.
All of this bit, including the driver, there is no room for manoeuvre in there, literally. They're under the water.
Yes, that's right, they're below the water.
Many of the drivers on exercise, when they got ashore, the drivers were up to their waist in water. That's how much water, because the bilge pumps they had in these things were useless,
Yeah,
pretty much useless.
very small.
So they were trying to pump water out, but the water was coming in quicker than they could get it out. Some got dropped in the wrong places and drifted, and the weather changed, and they went at slight angles. Now, when these things are going into the wind, okay, coming ashore, you can imagine how the weight was starting to bulge over.
And that, we think, must have been what happened to the Valentine tank that we dived on in Studland Bay. Manned by teenage lads, their vehicle became overwhelmed by choppy seas, causing the tank to fill up with water and sink.
Right, shall I go then? Let's just get in then, see if I can.
For the young soldiers caught inside the tank, that must have been terrifying.
Here we go.
Even on land, inside this vehicle is uncomfortable and claustrophobic. But being on water as it begins to sink doesn't bear thinking about.
You never get out of this. I'm telling you now, if you were in this tank and it started going under, the person who definitely isn't getting out is the person who's sitting where I am now. It would be impossible.
One little thing, you have got an escape hatch underneath you, but in the DD it was sealed up, so even double trouble.
Six tank crew members lost their lives during Operation Smash and are commemorated in a memorial at Fort Henry in Studland.
What were the lessons that were learned from Operation Smash with the loss of those tanks and the lives of those young men?
Okay, basically the major operation that was learnt was they didn't use Valentines on D-Day. These were substituted by the Shermans because they tended to work a lot better. The problem with this was you had to have the gun turned round, so even if you did get ashore, you wanted the gun up front, and it was a problem. Also, these were less stable than the Shermans.
Because of lessons learnt at Operation Smash, the British Shermans, the duplex tanks, are released a lot closer to the beach.
Absolutely.
And what's the success rate there?
90%.
So 90% of those tanks that were launched into the sea make it onto the beach.
Absolutely, and took part in the fighting, which helped the British and the Canadians take their required beaches.
With the loss of 6 lives and 7 tanks, valuable lessons were learnt about how far the tanks could swim and their limitations in poor weather.
Lessons that would prove invaluable just 2 months later during the actual landings in Normandy.
And that's where I'm headed next.
British ingenuity may have overcome the problem of how to get tanks onto the beaches as safely and as stealthily as possible. But once there, they had to face up to German ingenuity, a military machine that had conquered most of Europe with relative ease.
It may be hard to envisage it now, But on the 6th of June 1944, 5,000 ships and 150,000 men began to attack these beaches. The Germans had been practicing for this eventuality for 3 years. They knew where all their killing zones were on the beach. Their artillery were pointed out, but they were met with a tremendous salvo from the Royal Navy and the US Navy, shells landing in. From the skies, bombers rained down from the RAF and from the United States Air Force. And then the landing craft came forward, landing on the beach. There were so many casualties in the first wave, the sea turned red. But at the end of the first day of D-Day, despite the loss of 4,000 Allied personnel, the beachhead had been established.
The seabed along these iconic beaches are littered with the remnants of the might that the Allies threw at German forces. We've assembled at Port-en-Bessin for the first dive. But as we head out, the weather takes a turn for the worse.
Slightly fresher.
The wind has picked up dramatically.
That's not what we thought was forecast, right?
No, it's come up a bit since yesterday.
What's the implication, though, for us in terms of diving?
Well, I think we can stick a boat nose out and have a look.
Joining our dive team today is maritime wreck expert Ian Taylor.
What ticket have you got?
Bus ticket.
Bus ticket, yeah.
Our first dive will be on a massive American transport ship, the USS LST-523, like this one. The LST-523 was carrying vital supplies to troops who had established the beachhead.
Whee!
But the further out to sea we get, the worse the swell becomes.
So you've got a good 15 to 20 knots blowing in now, probably a metre sea. So
Yeah, as the
whatever you think.
big one comes through in there. And I think my worry is that the forecast suggests it's due to worsen.
It's worse than this afternoon,
Yeah. Hey, Ross, you got a minute?
God. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to call it.
Okay, mate. Well, the amateur that I am, I know it's easy to get in, but I'd struggle getting out in this.
We got to think of the worst case scenario. You know, if someone's a bit unresponsive, we got to try and get them back in.
You never
Anybody can get in the water. It's getting out the sea hard part. So sorry, buddy.
Obviously very disappointed that we're not diving, but as you can see, it really is too rough. But I'm also reminded that this is very similar to the conditions on D-Day. Those men had no choice. They had to get out of those ships and hit the beaches.
Two days later, conditions seem perfect to try again, and this time, I'm definitely getting in the water.
Happy chap. Let's go, buddy.
So we're about to dive on LST-523. What was it, Neil?
Landing ship tanks. Big old boat.
The United States ship USS LST-523 was one of the hundreds of landing crafts that did the heavy lifting after D-Day, transporting equipment across the Channel to Normandy to ensure that once they landed, the Allies had the equipment they needed to make the long march to Berlin.
And they'll be carrying tanks, bulldozers, other vehicles like that, personnel. They're flat-bottomed, they're big ships.
How big?
200 foot long, something like that. So, yeah, big. Yeah,
Length of a football pitch, right?
Yeah. They're bound to have ammunition on board and stuff like that.
Yeah, so if they do get hit, they're going to go with a big bang. So.
Yeah.
She went down on the 19th of June, nearly 2 weeks after D-Day. By this point, the Allies had secured the beachhead and swept the shipping lanes for mines. So why she sank is a mystery.
Get your kit on, boys.
Okay.
The vessel is 24 meters down. There's going to be plenty of treasure to find, but all of it will be too big to bring to the surface, so we'll need to examine it on the bottom.
That's well and truly diveable now, so as soon as you can go, I will go.
Stand by.
land on the middle of the wreck.
The whole area is just littered with wreckage. As we can see now, it must have capsized on its way down because the ship is totally turned over. Massive area of destruction.
The ship lies upside down, completely split in two, with parts scattered all over the seabed.
Something that seems to be coming out of the seabed here. Can you see that, Ross? Looks like the front of a tank or some sort of armoured vehicle. Wow. It's a Sherman tank. You can see the tracks. Oh, it's heavily corroded, but you can see it, what it is. This tank is a Mark IV A4 Sherman tank. A landing ship like the LST-523 could have 20 of these aboard it. Each tank weighs 30 tons. Destined to fight in a war, it never made it to the beaches. Ian, whereabouts are we on the ship, man? This is the area where the hold was, the cargo hold. The stern will be that way.
We are now above the main cargo hold, but the entire contents have been blown across the sea floor.
This whole area now, there's nothing left here. It's just sand with the odd bit of wreckage. So this must be where the vessel broke up. It must have broken in two here, I would have thought.
All of the evidence here points to some sort of major detonation.
The explosion that happened here must have been absolutely tremendous. The middle of the ship lifted up and dropped, breaking its back.
But what kind of extraordinary German device could have had the enormous power needed to have broken the ship's back and gutted it in this way?
I mean, the whole ship has been blown apart.
I'm diving off the Normandy coast on the wrecks of some of the ships which supported the greatest amphibious landing in history, D-Day. I'm 24 meters underwater on the USS LST-523, a tank landing ship that suffered a massive explosion as it was bringing men and tanks ashore nearly 2 weeks after D-Day. The question is, what could possibly have caused such destruction at sea so long after the Allies had gained full control of the beaches?
This area here, I think is the ramp that goes up and down. You think this is part of the actual, the runway effectively that allowed all the cargo to come off? Looks like another tank here. See the cocks of the wheels and then the wheels coming up of another tank. This side of it, you can see the tracks. And there's another tank. Gosh, you look at it.
We work our way down the port side towards the stern of the ship.
See that, Ross? That's the engine room. It would have had 2 engines. That's one of them there. Wow, she was an absolute massive ship. You have to think just how many of these were coming in with vital supplies for an Allied force that has just landed in Normandy. So this is obviously the rear of the ship and not where the explosion happened, so most of it, though corroded, is intact. And obviously somebody's taken the propellers off because they're made out of bronze. But this is what would have driven the ship 100 meters or so in length through the water.
I still don't know what happened to this massive ship, but my air is running low.
I'm on 60 bar now, mate. See you on the other side.
That's coming up now. Well, Ross?
Yeah, dive reports well.
Good man, good man.
You get a real sense of the scale of just how big those LSTs were.
Yeah, all the midships areas just obliterated. They had a massive explosion of some sort. This caused total damage.
You got to think what was going through the minds of those men. They're preparing, they're that close, they're ready to go to war, and out of nowhere, this tremendous explosion literally splits the ship in two.
Which will account for why it went down so fast.
But it doesn't solve the whole mystery. Within a week of D-Day, the Allies had destroyed almost all German coastal defences and carried out a huge mine-clearing operation. So how and why did the LST-523 get taken out by enemy firepower almost 2 weeks later? I'm told the answer lies on another wreck not far away. The SS Empire broadsword was a 7,000-ton infantry ship mass-produced in America and loaned to Britain. Like the LST, she went down about 5 miles from the beach, weeks after the first landings. Whatever gutted LST-523 could have also destroyed broadsword.
So she's 120 metres long, big.
It's a fair-sized wreck, this. A lot of places you can get in, so make sure that you're aware situationally exactly where you are. Don't go wandering in and out unless you go as a buddy team, yeah?
In terms of internally into the ship, right?
Yeah.
And she's laying on her starboard side, right?
That's right, yeah. Stands off the seabed a good 8 to 10 metres.
The big question is, why is she under the sea?
Well, that's for you boys to discover, isn't it? That's what you're being paid all the big bucks for.
I'm worth every penny.
I need to call my agent.
The wreck is lying at a depth of 27 metres.
All right, breeze back on. Blocks reset.
Okay, I'm happy with you, Ross.
Take your time, don't trip.
When you're ready, hold your mask.
All right, mate. Yeah.
At about 20 metres, I'm greeted by a thick green fog. The recent bad weather has kicked up tons of silt,
The viz is quite shocking.
and I'm starting to feel disorientated.
Difficult to make out very much.
Yeah, Ross, very murky conditions today. You need to come up onto the top here.
SS Empire broadsword sank on the 2nd of July 1944. She was armed with a 12-inch gun and 12 anti-aircraft. She was 120 metres long. Ian, can you see me?
Lots of superstructure here. It's a large ship. Laying on its side. Got a door there. A door into the accommodation area of the wreck.
Like the LST, the wreck has been split apart. Badly twisted, she lies mainly on her starboard side. There were just over 70 men on board when she was hit. But as we tried to work out what happened to the ship, conditions deteriorate badly.
It's difficult to work out what that is. I think this may have been the bridge.
We're now halfway along the ship. The middle section is completely sheared away from the foredeck and the rear deck.
This is about the midsection of the ship, and we're on the port side. It looks like this is where a major explosion took place.
Just lots of debris everywhere.
Just a colossal piece of steel. We're in too shallow a water for it to have been hit by a torpedo from a German submarine. And by this time, the German gun emplacements on the coastline have been taken out.
Just making our way along towards the stern. It's difficult to tell exactly where we are, but it's a load of broken wreckage here.
As we move through the wreck, the tide is changing and stirring up more silt.
I think we're swimming against the current now. Where are they?
My comms go down,
Ian, can you hear me? Over.
and visibility drops to near zero.
I'm not getting you, bro.
Where's Ross gone? Is he with Mark? Where's Ross? Where's Ross gone?
I'm currently on the wreck of the SS Empire Broadsword, 27 meters underwater. Broadsword was a giant infantry landing ship which took part in the D-Day landings. We're trying to solve the mystery of why she and another ship, the LST-523, went down following massive explosions. But our dive has taken a turn for the worse. My comms are down and visibility is at about 2 feet.
Where's Ross gone?
And I'm running low on air.
Where's Ross?
After a tense few minutes, Mark and I eventually find each other.
Can you hear me? Over.
Our comms crackle back into life. Neil decides to abort the dive.
This is an abort.
We saying an abort, yeah?
Roger that.
Got up, yeah? Okay.
Neil, if you can hear us, we're at safety stop. Over.
It's a reminder of just how disorientating wreck diving can be.
That's the first time I've ever felt it. I felt slightly hemmed in. I felt slightly claustrophobic. I couldn't actually see my own hand at certain points.
Yeah, the visibility was very poor.
We cleared up while we were down there what we could see. Too shallow for a torpedo.
Yeah.
From a submarine. So that only leaves us one conclusion.
It's got to be a mine.
It's got to be a mine.
But if it was a mine, why was it not picked up by the massive and meticulous minesweeping operation conducted by the Allies once they had landed on the beachhead? What was it that the Germans had built that could evade detection and cause such devastation? To find out more, I've come to meet historian Paul Woodidge at a French museum dedicated to World War II artifacts.
So, Paul, the Germans know the Allies are coming. So what kind of weapons do they deploy to defend the Normandy coastline?
So the first thing is the bunkers. Just strings of German defences along the actual coast with large caliber weapons, small caliber weapons, obstacles on the beaches. That's what we think of. But beyond that, in the channel are mines, such as this one here, the archetypical, like in the movies, the mines with the contact pressure points on it. And you get a big explosion for your money. It's a potential ship loss to one mine. I mean, it doesn't work like that in practice, but that's what you're talking about.
A ship costs a lot more money
than a mine. Yeah.
So there are thousands of these mines out in the channel. What do the Allies do about them?
Well, they have to set about finding out what the risk is, what they can do to prepare themselves to eliminate that risk. So whatever time you spend clearing mines can't be at the expense of the Germans finding out you're coming.
So they clear, as well as they can, these channels that go into the beaches, and then they progressively widen them as more and more shipping comes across from Britain to land on the Normandy beaches.
Yeah, and they are sweeping, but not necessarily destroying them. So you're towing them out the way, identifying them, marking them, making sure the fleet that's following knows where they are to navigate their way through them. But if you start blowing things up in the middle of the Channel hours before D-Day, the Germans are, hello, what's going on?
It's a balancing act between how many mines you can clear or how many mines you can't clear against the loss of surprise.
Yeah, but it's the mine-sweeping operation is vast. Of the 5,000 to 7,000 ships that are involved in getting the fleet across, including the landing craft, 350 are involved in the mine-sweeping operation.
So that's a lot of ships.
It's a huge amount.
Most mines found in the Channel before D-Day were contact mines. They would certainly blow a hole in a ship, but these mines were unlikely to have taken out the LST-523 or Empire broadsword. But in response to British ingenuity on the beaches, the Germans had come up with their own deadly device to halt the Allies' advance.
There was another type of mine the Germans had been developing for a year or so that they thankfully didn't use on June the 6th, but did use them in the weeks that follow, and it's called a pressure mine or an oyster mine.
Where do these mines suddenly materialise from?
These are mostly dropped by the air, by aircraft coming up from Brittany and other places in France that the Germans still have.
Even though German guns on the beaches had been silenced, Hitler still occupied much of mainland France, giving the Luftwaffe access to fly over Normandy waters. Despite the minesweeping operations which followed, these aircraft were able to secretly drop pressure mines, which then lay on the seabed waiting for ships.
So these are dropped anywhere and then they become a threat there, because the problem with pressure mines is the pressure created by the detonation of this can bring down a very large ship. So you can't tell much necessarily from a wreck about what type of mine it was. But my hunch is a lot of those ships that went down in late June and July were from these pressure mines. It's a new bit of tech that we were just
weren't up to speed with.
Weren't up to speed. It really only developed how to counter that post-war, thankfully.
Despite the devastation, nearly 100 men were rescued when SS Empire broadsword hit that mine, but 7 lives were sadly lost. It's been a privilege to explore the underwater remains of the Allied invasion of Normandy, and truly humbling to see what so many young men had to endure. Operation Overlord didn't end the war in Europe, but it did begin the process through which victory was eventually achieved. Within 2.5 months of D-Day, the German army were in full retreat in France. But success for the Allies in Normandy did not come without its price. 120,000 wounded, 53,000 dead. The planning, the ingenuity, and ultimately the sacrifices here changed the course of history. And for that, we should be eternally grateful.